Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be talking about Jquery. So Jquery is a very popular JavaScript library which makes DOM manipulation very easy. So DOM manipulation stands for Document Object Manipulation, and the Document Object Model is the HTML page and the elements that are formed when you view the page source. So this is the Document Object Model, and it makes modifying the HTML elements on a page very easy using Jquery. Jquery can do a lot of other things like add events to elements. You can modify the events, change the background color, add CSS files. You can do all of this with Jquery. So in this tutorial we'll cover how to access elements, change some properties of them, change some property of these elements, and then also how to add event listeners onto elements so that you can wait for a user to click on an element or hover over an element, for example. And okay, so we'll start off by, we include the Jquery library. So if you go and you type in Jquery CDN, and this is the Jquery code is hosted online, and you can get any of these versions. So we're going to be using version 2, and you can get the minified version, and you take this code and you paste it into the head of your page. So here it is. And then if you actually take this file, you can see that it's just a Jquery source code minified. So we can close this. And then we'll create a new file called scripts.js, and we'll include it in our directory. And now, so once this is included, we can start using the Jquery functions. So Jquery uses the $sign when you're about to access an element on the page. So what we'll do is first most Jquery files start with this line, document ready. So when the document is ready, we can run some code within this function. So to test it out, we'll do console log ready. So to make sure all this is working, when we reload this page in the console, you can open up the console by right-clicking and clicking inspect. If you reload, we'll see ready. And I forgot to mention, this code is from a previous tutorial. It's from the tutorial on media queries in CSS. So I'll paste this code along with a demo below the video, but the code is from that tutorial. The CSS has some basic CSS reset, and then some styles along with this media query from the previous tutorial, where if you shrunk the page, the list elements stack on top of each other for mobile. So that's what this code is. So we can start using Jquery now. So between these two lines, document ready function, we can write our Jquery code in here. So code goes here. Now we have access to the document. We have access to the whole document now. So to select, in this tutorial we'll cover two main things that Jquery can do. Select and modify elements in the DOM, and then add event listeners, so you can wait for the user to interact with certain elements. So the first thing we'll go over is how to access these elements in the document object model. So here you can see we have one element with an ID of container, and then it has some list elements within it. And you can see that here. So now if, for example, we wanted to access this element, it's very similar to how you would in CSS. So in CSS, to access this element with an ID, you would do hashtag container, as you see here. So we're going to do the same thing. In Jquery, it's almost the same thing. You'd use the $sign, and then in parentheses, you're going to write what you want to access, but it has to go within a string. And now it's very similar to CSS. You do hashtag and container. And with this, we're able to access the element. So for example, if you set this equal to a variable, var a equals container, console log a, you can see that in the console it's going to print the actual element that exists in the DOM. So you can see it prints this, and if you actually hover over this, it highlights this element, and if you click it, it actually takes you to the element in the DOM. It takes you to the actual element. So for example, if we use the Jquery function hide, so we're calling the hide function on this element, when we reload the page, it actually gets hidden. You can see here hide sets the style display to none. So this is one function you can perform on an element in the DOM. But now we can do a lot of other things, like we can change the style. So for example, you can call the CSS function and pass in an object. And now you can do things like background color. So this is just like a normal JavaScript object. So background color red, and we'll do padding 50 pixels. And now if we reload the page, you'll see that the background became red. It's kind of ugly now, and there's a lot more padding. So we'll get rid of this function here. And so you can access elements and stack them on top of each other just as you would in CSS. So to access each of these list items within the container, you can do something like you do in CSS here, container list. You can do the same thing. And this accesses each item, each list item within this container. So now you can change the background of these elements. So you can change font size. Oops. So we're going to change the font size to 50 pixels of each list item within it, and you can see that they got much bigger now. So this is how you access elements using jQuery. So we can also add elements. So here we're modifying elements. We can also add elements into our HTML page. So if we get the container, let's just say we want to add a few more list items into here. So what we'll do is we'll do container append list item Z. And now you can see this item was added in. And so it acts just as it would, just as a normal list item would. So here you can see in the actual DOM, A, B, C, D, and Z. It's added in. If you do the inner the inner HTML function is actually a JavaScript command, but you can do HTML. And now this actually gets rid of everything inside of it. So HTML will replace what's in the HTML with what you provided in this function. So here we're getting rid of everything, and we're adding in just this item. And you can mimic this append function by setting what's in the HTML to a variable. And then setting the HTML to A plus list item Z. So here what we're doing is we're getting the contents of the container and we're storing in a variable. And then we're setting the contents of the contents of this container to what was currently inside of it plus another item. So here you can see that it behaves just like the append function. So we can get rid of this and simply just do append. And we can actually append two items. So we can append Z and Q. And here you can see we have Z and Q. So the elements aren't properly being formatted because the styles aren't. Oh, because in the CSS file here we're accessing the first and the third child only. So it's this child and this child have the margin right. So to actually get around this, we'll change this to nth child 2n minus 1. Actually, 2n should work. Okay, so 2n minus 1 works. So basically, for each n, ranging from 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., we're multiplying it by 2 and then subtracting 1. So in this case, when n is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, minus 1, which is this element. When n is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, minus 1 is 3, so it's this element. So 1, 2, 3. So all of the elements on this left side will have a margin right of 20 pixels. Okay, so back to the jQuery. So we just appended two items. You can also prepend. And you can see as Z and Q are added before these elements. I'll also post a reference to a bunch of jQuery functions. You have to memorize a lot of them. There are a lot of cool functions for manipulating the display. So for example, we can do something like fade out, and then you can pass a variable, pass a word here, slow. So when the page reloads, this whole container will fade out slowly, as you just saw. And then you can just do set timeout. So set timeout is a JavaScript function. So we're going to fade out this element, and then we're going to fade it back in after 2 seconds by using the fade in function. So now if we reload the page, it fades out, and then after 2 seconds, it fades back in. So these are some cool functions. You also have slide up and slide down. So it slides up, and then after about 2 seconds, it slides back down. So there are a lot of interesting jQuery plugins as well that provide a lot of interesting functionality for the document object model. And in the next tutorial, we'll actually cover animating properties on the HTML page. So the next thing I want to cover, aside from just accessing the elements on the page and then changing their properties, is adding event listeners. So what that does is it'll wait for the user to interact with an element somehow, and then it'll perform some action. So to do that, you use the on function. And on takes 2 variables. Well, it can actually take more, which you can look up in the documentation. But for this tutorial, we're going to focus on two properties, or 2 parameters, sorry. On is the event. So in this case, let's use a simple event like click. On click, and then it performs some action, which goes in this callback. So this is the callback. So you can actually, this can be a function declared outside of here. So function callback. So when the container is clicked, it'll run this function callback. And this function can do anything. So we can alert clicked. Now if we reload the page and we click anywhere on here, we get clicked, which is pretty cool. So this might have taken a few more lines of JavaScript to do, but in jQuery it's very easy. You just do on click and you call a callback. And here we can do almost anything you want using jQuery or JavaScript. So when the element is clicked, you have access actually to this. So this binds to whatever element is being accessed. So in this case, we're clicking on the container element. We can just do this, and it'll bind to the element that was clicked on. So in this case, container. So this fade out. So we click on it, it fades out. You can also add in elements. So when you click on it, we'll do this append list item Z. And now if we click on it, it's continuously adding elements, which is pretty cool. And it's really easy to do this using jQuery. Click and it's just adding elements. And you can also add in some logic here. So for example, we'll set a variable limit equals 10. Or actually, let's say, yeah, limit equals 10 and var counter equals 0. So we can only add at most 10 elements to this container. That's the goal of this. So when you click on this container, it'll append an element and it'll increase the counter. And then when you want to add an element, it needs to check, is the counter below the limit? So we'll put all this within an if block. And we'll just check, is counter less than limit? If so, do this, otherwise stop. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now you can't add, I'm clicking on this, but you can't add any more elements. And you can also add a button in here and remove elements. So you can actually remove the last list item. So to do that, you would, you can store the list items in an array and then remove the last element. So for example, let's say we had an array of list items. Z, Q, R. So we have these elements, and now let's actually, so if counter is less than limit, so let's actually get rid of this if command here. And what we'll do is when you click on the container, it'll add the elements in this array. So let's just make sure that's working. So it'll append array, And now, so this needs to take a string. You can see this takes a string. So let's actually take array and we'll join it. Now if we reload, you can see that the 3 elements are added in. Really easy with jQuery. So this is what we can do. I'm clicking back. Okay, so if the counter is less than the limit, we'll append this item, z, but we'll also add this to the array. So array push and let's empty this array. So here we have an empty array. If the counter is less than the limit, then this append this list item z, push this into the array, and then add 1 to the counter. So if you reload this, it should actually work. Whoops. Oh, it's taking a while to load. Okay, so if you, oh, now I can't load jQuery. Oops, sorry guys. Okay, so now if you click on it, it's adding these elements and it'll stop at 10. Okay, now what we want to do is when you click on, let's just say some button over here, it'll remove the elements. So let's add a button into the HTML, button ID. Remove, and we'll give it an idea of remove. So now when you click on remove, so it'll look very similar to this. ID remove on click. It calls a function which you can declare simply in here. So here you can see we have this callback and it's using this function here. Here we're just going to pass in an anonymous function. So if you click remove, it'll remove the last item in the container. And so you can do that by removing the last element in the array and then populating the container again. So here when you click on this, we're actually going to set, we're going to do array pop, so get rid of the last element, and then container HTML array join. So here we're adding elements, and when you click on remove, oh whoops, it actually removed all of them. Oh, okay, because, so here we're starting off with these elements, A, B, C, D. Let's actually remove these. Okay, now if you click on this, it's adding in elements, stops at 10. If you click remove, it'll remove the last one by one. Remove, remove, and you can, oh, okay, and you can't click and add anymore because we never updated the limit. So here, when you remove one, you're removing the last one in the array and updating the container. You actually want to take the counter and subtract 1. And now everything should work properly. Add 10 elements. Counter is not defined. Whoops, that's my mistake. I misspelled it. So here, if you add 10 elements and you click remove, it'll remove, and then you can add again. So here we have a simple jQuery example where you can add elements. This isn't really too meaningful, but in the next few tutorials we'll cover how to make a chessboard and some other interesting projects you can create with jQuery. Remove. Okay, so in the next tutorial we'll cover how to animate HTML elements on the page.